Beautifully relaxing, energizing, renewing. All parks do that for us, the people who enjoy and depend upon them. But how often do we think of the history of the parks we know and love? This is a story of one of those parks, Central Park in Schenectady, New York. The mid to late 1800s saw the explosion of the Industrial Revolution in the United States and around the world. Cities, rather than rural farming areas, expanded rapidly. Schenectady was no exception. The pastoral look of Schenectady was slowly being swallowed up by the trappings of city life. Factories, canal shipping, railroad tracks, and packed housing. It was an exciting period of growth, but it had its downsides. In the early 1900s, the people in smaller cities throughout the United States were just beginning to feel the pinch of urbanization. Houses started to be squeezed together on small plots, and children were being forced to play in busy streets. In 1905 in Schenectady, members of the Common Council, with Mayor Eisenmenger at the helm, formed the very first concept of a park system by recognizing the city's need for several things, among which were a safe place for children to play and grow healthy, and a pastoral environment to soothe busy adults. At that time, the proposal met with opposition from more conservative city government representatives. The park initiative was set on the back burner. Charles Steinmetz, a world-renowned and brilliant electrical engineer, emigrated from Bohemia in the late 1800s and began working for Thomas Edison at General Electric in Schenectady in 1896. He suffered from a congenital spine defect passed on by his father and grandfather. Steinmetz was never married, fearful that deformed children like himself would be born, but had acquired a family by adopting a young engineer, J.L. Hayden, who later married and lived in the house that Steinmetz had built for them with his wife and children. Steinmetz loved children and was loved by them. This picture shows Steinmetz with the grandchildren Midge, Billy, Joe, and his adopted son, Joseph Hayden, in 1914. This is a picture of the Hayden-Steinmetz family in their Wendell Avenue home. At the left is Corinne, Mrs. Hayden. To Steinmetz, however, she was mother. On her lap is William, Billy, then Steinmetz, Daddy, followed by Joe. Next is Joseph Leroy Hayden, father, with Marjorie, Midge, on his lap. Around 1911, Steinmetz began his very public and urgent crusade for the creation of a park system in Schenectady. He served as president of the Board of Education for the city, and later as a representative on the Common Council. In December of 1912, while on the Board of Education, Steinmetz wrote an impassioned and detailed letter to the aldermen of the city of Schenectady.
December 11th, 1912. As President of the Board of Education, I represent the 13,000 school children which look to you for parks and playgrounds where they can play without danger to life and limbs, while now their only playgrounds are the crowded streets of the city, amongst trolley cars and automobiles. I know that the majority of citizens are overwhelmingly in favor of parks and playgrounds, as we had ample occasion to realize from the grant approval which met even the ridiculously inadequate playgrounds provided during last summer. Only a small minority is in opposition to investing $300,000 in parks and playgrounds. This minority is instructive not by the men you find in it, but by the men you do not find. Amongst the men who have gone in print or otherwise stated their opposition to investing $300,000 in the park proposition, you cannot find a single one of the many ministers of our churches. They know how closely the moral welfare of the city is related to its physical welfare. You find not a single physician because they know of what inestimable value parks and playgrounds are for the physical welfare and for the health of the city, and the physicians are public-spirited enough to favor improved sanitary conditions, even if they lose business by it. Amongst the opposition, you find none of the working men or the working men's organizations. They have expressed their sentiments to you in no uncertain voice. They know what parks will be to them. You find in opposition none of the men connected with our ancient college, and also you find none of the men connected with big industries, they who have made Schenectady what it is today, a prosperous and progressive industrial city. You find in the opposition the same class of men who have opposed every progress in the memory of man, who have, in 1894, fought against asphalt streets because cobblestone pavement was good enough for Old Thorpe, who have a few years afterwards objected to driving typhoid from the city by supplying decent drinking water by our old waterworks. The same class of people have fought the elevation of the railroad tracks and the elimination of the grade crossings, and just as today, so many times in former years we have read in the paper and listened at hearings how the city would go to ruin, and we all would become bankrupt by the extravagance of relentless reformers who do not want to drink sewage or be run over by trains at grade crossings, who do not want their children maimed or killed by trolley cars or automobiles while playing in the streets. If you defeat the park proposition, when again the sweltering hot summer days come, people will remember the parks which they might have had you not deprived them thereof, and when the papers report of children run over and injured or killed, we will remember who deprives them of their safe playgrounds, and on whose hands is the responsibility and the guilt. There are two ways of defeating the park proposition. One is to vote down the needed bond issue. The other is to reduce the amount to a value insufficient to get anything worth anything, but possibly sufficient to buy a few useless pieces of land and thereby raise the price of adjoining territory so as to make it unavailable to the city forever after. We are just finishing a county jail and courthouse, $650,000. Nearly as much as is proposed for the parks and playgrounds. If you think that the health and welfare of our 13,000 children, the well-being of our thousands and thousands of law-abiding citizens is worth as much as the care of our criminals, you must vote for the parks and playgrounds. If your conscience tells you that the care of our criminals is more important and more desirable than the welfare and safety of our children, the health of our citizens, then vote against it. Let us drive tuberculosis out of the city as far as human effort can do by providing open-air breathing places, parks, and playgrounds. And remember, when you commit the children of the poor to death by tuberculosis in the slums and tenements which will rise up where the parks and playgrounds should be, tuberculosis is an infectious disease, and your own children may pay the penalty of your short-sightedness. Sincerely, Charles P. Steinmetz, President of the Board of Education, Schenectady, New York.